Well, another tough Sunday for your Las Vegas Raiders as they fall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 28-13, dropping their record to 2-11 in the process. Hanging out with Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports here in the fifth quarter. I am Eddie Paskal. Fitz, 9 games in a row for your Las Vegas Raiders that they have not tasted sweet victory. And really, like, you look at this game, and it feels like a lot of the games that we've talked about over the past 9 weeks. Playing tough, not pretty, but in the fourth quarter, and we'll talk about all the weirdness that happened in the fourth quarter, but in the fourth quarter, a 4-point ball game, but unfortunately, the Raiders just didn't have enough in the tank to get over the hump. When you look at this game, Fitz, when we kind of zoom out, what kind of stands out to you?
The identity of this team is pretty known right now, and when I say that, it's an identity of a team that's going to show up every week. They're going to fight. They're going to play as hard as they can. It's just the margins aren't there. And I keep looking at this. I cover a lot of college football, and sometimes you can see a team in college football that is playing their hearts out, and their give a damn is there in every possible way, and every single guy is working their tail off on the field, and it just can't sustain for 4 quarters. And that's what it feels like every single week is happening to this team. Like, the first quarter in this game was a bit of a disaster. And I thought there was an opportunity early in this game just to quit, to tuck your tail between your legs and say, okay, going to live to see another game. I thought this might turn out to be a really ugly football game, but instead the Raiders did what they do every week. They fought really hard, but as they continue to fight hard, there's such a line when you're not necessarily as good as your opponent sometimes. And I say that gently. I think there's a line where you're pushing so hard that you push too hard. And one or two plays where you did the wrong thing become the one or two mistakes that cost you a football game. And this is like so many games. I think the toughest ones to swallow are the next day where you're thinking, man, there were only a couple of plays that were difference between win and lose. And that's exactly how this was. Defense came to play, created turnovers. It was fun to watch that level of effort and energy, but it didn't turn into a win yet again.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that first quarter, Fitz, because kind of piggybacking off of what you said, right? Like, we can call a spade here, where the Raiders, as we sit here now on December 8th, just aren't a team that is good enough to find themselves down 14 points early, right? Like, I mean, the Bucks came out and they were firing, they were rocking. Those first 2 drives for Baker Mayfield and company looked unstoppable. You're like, what are these guys doing? But I mean, to your point though, give credit to the Raiders defense in particular for settling down, for having that moment of let's catch our breath and reassess, because really the rest of the way until the very end, right? I mean, they did what they needed to do. They kept the Raiders in this game. And I think it was our friend Vic Tafer who tweeted late in the fourth quarter, he goes, the defense just, at some point you got to give them a little help, and the levees broke a little bit for them. But I think the big picture on this, right, and we'll do our post-mortem of the season when that time comes, but this was a team that, to your point, fought, played with effort. There was no hanging of the heads. I mean, look, going into this game, Raiders are eliminated from the postseason. I don't want to say there's nothing to play for, but, the Raiders are very clear of where they are at this point in the season. It's very easy to say, hey, you know what? Long trip to the East Coast, this, that, and the other. We're not 100%, blah, blah, blah. And that was not the case for your Las Vegas Raiders today. So I think if you're a fan, you have to feel encouraged about the effort, the intensity, to use your term, Fitz, the give a damn from this team. But unfortunately, just not enough there to kind of buck this losing streak for the Silver and Black.
Yeah, I mean, you look around and you think about Michael Mayer really showed up big in this game, right? Sincere McCormick, who on every one of my Yahoo shows this week, I kept telling the entire world, if you weren't listening, you should be. On all of our fantasy football shows, I kept saying, go get your, like right now, when leagues are thin and you got a bunch of bye weeks, go get Sincere McCormick. He is going to get a starter's workload. You could see this coming. And what do you know? He got a starter's workload in this game. Sincere McCormick, 15 carries for 78 yards. Again, continues to prove that he looks like he could be part of the long-term future of this organization. And you see these flashes, and the hard part is that there is no margin of error to get anything wrong. And how many times you and I texted during the game, you see one penalty and you're like, well, there went
Yeah.
that drive. We'll see where we are next time. And it's not an offense, particularly at the quarterback position, that is built to withstand suddenly becoming one-dimensional in the play calling. And even with that, as teams continue to try and take Brock Bowers away, Jacoby Myers with another big game, like you can look across the board and see some of the flashes of the reasons that we were hopeful about this team a few months ago. It doesn't equal wins, because 53-53 It's just there aren't enough Michael Mayers and Brock Bowers, and there aren't enough Jacoby Myers all across the board, especially at key positions, for this to be a sustainable thing.
I'm glad you brought up the penalties, Fitz, because that was one of my notes that I had in my rundown for today. Was those big penalties and big moments. We talk about the JPJ blindside block early in the first quarter. Jack Jones, the PI on fourth down that ended up ultimately not hurting the silver and black. But to your point, it's those ill-timed penalties, right? And it feels like by and large through AP's tenure that the Raiders have done a really good job of cleaning up those moments, right? Towards the end of last year, right? What was the stat? The Raiders were the least penalized team in the NFL when Antonio Pierce took over. Well, now I think that it's hard because there's got to be a designation between the holding that takes you from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 9 and a blindside block that, like to your point, essentially ends a drive for a Raiders offense that has struggled to find any continuity over the past couple of weeks. But it is one of those things where you talk about the margins being so thin, and the Raiders having to do, I don't want to say everything right to earn a W, but have to go 99 out of 100 to kind of pull this thing together and get a win. It's hard when you're shooting yourselves in the foot. And one thing that I did want to ask you about is Brock Bowers. So Brock Bowers today becomes the NFL record holder for most receptions by a rookie tight end. So shout out to Brock. Kind of lost in all of this, but they kept talking on the broadcast, Fitz, about the fact that Brock wasn't getting his reps earlier in the game. They brought it up multiple times, especially in the fourth quarter. They said this is a little too little, too late from the Raiders offense. Like, what was Tampa doing to kind of take Brock out of this? Because we looked up at one point during the second half, and Brock had 2 targets for 1 catch.
I felt like they were making Aiden O'Connell uncomfortable, and it's as simple as that sounds. Frankly, what did we see? Remember, the Raiders were in the red zone and drew a pass interference when he was trying to get the ball to Brock. But what happened? Aiden was falling down and just sort of heaved it in his direction. It just takes a second for quarterbacks in this offense right now to find Brock. And it's not as simple as just one step release, get to your tight end. It's just these things take a little bit of time. I thought the quarterback being uncomfortable was a big part of it. Plus, what have we seen ever since the Broncos came out and triple team bracketed everything that Brock was doing? That seems to be the new approach. They're going to put all assets to it. Teams are willing to let Jacoby get a ton of targets in order to win. That's part of the strategy. I think they're going to have to probably get a little bit more clever in moving him around and figuring out different ways to get him the football. I thought the broadcast fairly pointed out there were some big downs that Brock came off the field. I don't think you can do that. I think Brock is just going to have to be sort of the Max Crosby on offense on the field for every single play. But I do wonder if there's some motion opportunities that we'll maybe see if they can get some different matchups created. One thing we see from really strong offenses is when I know how you're going to take my guy away, I move my guy around as much as possible. I think we might need more of that. But realistically, you're going to have consistently other guys step up to take some of the pressure off of Brock. Otherwise, this is just a new reality. It's tough to get him the ball when he's the main and sometimes only option.
Yeah, agreed 100%, Fitz. And I think really as we go through this next month with now questions at quarterback, which we'll get to in a second, like it'll be really interesting to see Scott Turner kind of go into his bag of tricks and figure out, okay, how do I, to your point, get our best offensive player involved, and how do I do it consistently, not just for a quarter, not just for a half, but for a full 60 minutes. And Fitz, we were talking at the jump where it felt like this is one of those games where we're having the same conversation that we've had the past 9 weeks together. Well, I don't want to bring it all down to one stat, but we look at the red zone efficiency. Tampa goes 3 of 3 in the red zone. The Raiders go 1 of 4, right? And we talk about those margins, Fitz, and I love field goals, right? Carlson's my guy. I love to see those guys put points on the board. But at some point, especially at this point in the year, Fitz, you got to put 6 up instead of 3. You just have to.
You also have to, in order to do that, I feel like what you have to have are 10 plays that you just feel comfortable with. And how often do we see this? Like, the offense doesn't look comfortable inside the 10-yard line. And part of that is a whole season of the offensive line having some struggles. Although I want to credit the big guys up front have played much better the last few weeks. I think, since we've seen some of the changes with the coaching staff, we've seen an offensive line playing better. The run game has been a lot more consistent. Even the comfort in going for some of these quarterback sneaks has been more consistent. It just feels like, as much as we have, I don't want to say joke, but we pined over the year how difficult 3rd and 1 and 4th and 2 is for this team. I think that what we're really seeing is that short yardage situation in the red zone, there isn't a group of plays that everybody's comfortable with. So what do you do if that's your situation? And man, there's not an easy answer for that. So often you see explosive teams that are really good with pick plays in the red zone, right? But one thing that we know a pick play requires is perfect timing. Like, otherwise it's going to be offensive pass interference every single time. I don't trust the timing of this offense to properly execute those things because they just haven't found that rhythm. So I think a lot of this comes down to rhythm and comfort with those 5 to 10 plays that you can drop. It's like, hey, this is going to go to Brock Bowers. We are going to get him open. That's been one of the things that people have talked about all year. Not enough touchdowns for Brock. In part, that's because there's just not enough red zone looks that everybody's comfortable with. And I don't know this late in the season how that changes. I think part of the identity of this team is that it's not comfortable offensively in the red zone.
And I'll add one thing to that, Fitz, too. It's hard to find that, that offensive rhythm. It's hard to find that cohesion, not only when you've had changes on the offensive line, but it feels like it's a different quarterback every 3 weeks. And unfortunately for us today, Aiden O'Connell goes down there late in the third quarter. I just want to make sure I have my timing right for Aiden. Early in the fourth quarter, late in the third quarter. Desmond Ridder comes in with just about 13 and a half left, takes the Raiders the rest of the way. But, we heard from Antonio Pierce post-game, and he was asked, as you would imagine, first question out of the gate, how's Aiden look? And he says, quote, doesn't look good. So, again, you and I are not medical professionals, but if Desmond Ridder is going to be the guy, at least on Monday night, we get the Desmond Ridder revenge game against the Falcons in prime time. But if that's the case for any type of extended period of time, like we talk about it being hard to find that cohesion, we talk about it hard to find that rhythm when you have all these moving pieces. And I think especially in the red zone, we have seen that in a pretty big way. But speaking about our guy, Desmond, Desmond finishes his afternoon with the silver, for the silver and black, with going 12 of 18, 101 yards. Granted, a lot of that kind of in mop-up duty at the end of the game, but you did see a few kind of differences, obviously, compared to him and Aiden. Desmond a little more willing, a little more able to get out of the pocket, use his legs, extend plays. But it'll be interesting to see what this guy's got over the final month if that ends up being the case.
Yeah, I mean, this is Desmond's opportunity to
Huge
prove
opportunity.
He still belongs in the league.
Yeah.
But let's also be honest. If you go back to August on this show and on Raider Nation Radio both, when I was asked what happens if there's a revolving door at quarterback, and at the time we were talking about Gardner and Aiden, and I kept saying if we end up in a situation where at the end of the year we're looking at it, it's like, hey, Gardner started a few games, then Aiden, then Gardner, then Aiden. That means this season was lost, and I felt that then. I think now that you're seeing it's Gardner, Aiden, Gardner, Desmond, like this is just, it's hard for any team to win in this situation. So if you're Desmond, you got to put all the noise aside and you got to look at it and say, okay, this is my opportunity to show the league I can still play. This is my opportunity to show this team I can be part of the future. This is the opportunity to put tape out there for the world. And it is an offense where, man, what is Desmond Ridder comfortable with? He was comfortable in Atlanta using his legs with a lot of rollout and getting the ball to a tight end. Like we all thought that Kyle Pitts would be a bigger part of the offense in Atlanta, but big receivers, big tight end, something that Desmond was really comfortable with in Atlanta. So now I expect that what we'll see against Atlanta is a lot of rollouts and a lot of trying to move everything left and right while it gives more time to get the ball over to Brock and to Michael Mayer. So there's a good chance to really see what that tight end tandem can be over the end of the season with a mobile quarterback, which is part of what we just need to identify in this offense anyway.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, Fitz. I was just kind of thinking and going back in my head as you were talking about that. This is now back-to-back years, so we're looking at 2024 and 2023, where the Raiders will, and we're assuming that Desmond will start on Monday, right? Like again, like we're recording this 30 minutes after the game ends, so we don't have a full medical makeup of Aiden. But if Desmond does end up starting on Monday, this will now be back-to-back seasons where the Raiders have started 3 quarterbacks in a season, 3 starting quarterbacks. And again, we talked about that rotating door, and it's hard to find any cohesion. It's hard to find any rhythm. It's hard to find any consistency when that's the case. But every team, unfortunately, is not immune to the injury bug in the NFL, and the Raiders are just going to have to figure out a way to kind of get through this over the next final month, huh?
Yeah, and while everybody suffers from the injury bug, what we have to acknowledge are that teams that are in the process of trying to reestablish, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, their teams, their culture, their organization, they don't have the depth to handle the injuries. They just don't. So this is something that I think, frankly, if we're being fair, let's go back to April, the NFL draft. When Brock Bowers was selected in the first round of the draft, at the time, what did it tell us? And what did some of us say about it? It told us that Tom Telesco understood that while we want as fans to see wins right now, he understood that the roster was in need of a talent infusion all over the place. And he was going to take a patient approach to rebuilding it by taking the best player that was available to him. We learned that about Tom Telesco. I think what we've seen throughout the course of the season is what Tom Telesco, if you injected true serum in his veins, probably expected. that this is a team that needs a lot of help in a lot of positions, and that's a big job. A home run offseason will help you with depth with what, 5 or 6 players, 7 maybe if you're lucky. You start talking about the way depth has been tested for a team that frankly didn't have the ability to handle depth being tested. It's one of the variables we couldn't have known, and it's one of the reasons that this season has gone so wildly off the rails. And if you're Tom Telesco or Mark Davis or anybody else in the halls that you walk through every day at work, Eddie, like you've got to understand, hey, this doesn't get fixed. I say this all the time. We live in an Ozempic society where everybody wants to inject something in and immediately become better. Sometimes the way that you actually change your life is by committing to new habits and figuring out new ways to do things and making long-term goals and figuring out long-term ways to do things a different way. And suddenly you wake up 3 years later and you're healthier and you're in better shape and you feel better about yourself. Like that's real to football too. We all want this sort of injected, and in a year we're totally fixed. And sometimes that happens. Houston Texans, a great example. Washington Commanders, great example. But more often than not, let's remember that Dan Campbell started year 2 of his regime 1-6, and the Lions said, nope, we know what we're doing. This is going to take a little bit of time. I just think we have to understand for Tom Telesco and this roster particularly, they already knew and they understand it's going to take a little bit of time. This is a rebuild process.
Yeah, and I think to be fair, Fitz, right? We could also call the long-term steady Eddie approach the Jason Fitz, right? As we go day by day, and we're just a little bit better, and we're making these life changes, and you look great. And yes, well, I hope that 2025 has the Fitz effect on the silver and black.
I've said this, and look, I'm always transparent with my audience on every platform, but I'll say this, I've said this so many times. I sat down, and I've never been a big guy, but I put on a little weight, right? I've never been big, but I sat down at the beginning of the year with a bunch of people trying to get lipo and get all my fat sucked out. And I was like, this is the only thing I'm going to do. And I found out I wasn't a good candidate for it. Turns out I had to change some things in my life anyway. In less time than it would have taken me to recover from plastic surgery, I actually changed my life by doing the little things the right way. That's it. And that's oversimplification of football, but that's part of why it is on my mind. Like, yeah, I go to the gym 6 days a week and I eat all the right things 7 days a week. And it's not always fun, but that's what I've had to do to get the results that I wanted anyway. Now, frankly, my body fat's lower and my weight's lower than it ever would have been if I got lipo in the first place. So like, I just look at these things. I'm like, it's not that different than how we approach everything. We all want a shortcut because so many fans like me are tired of watching a team that isn't in playoff contention. I just think that we have to understand that if you want to become the Kansas City Chiefs, you don't just need Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and arguably the best defensive coordinator in the league, one of the best GMs also. You need a consistent structure of quality drafts that turn into quality players that are getting quality development from a quality coaching staff. Like all of these, like it's not any one of these things, it's all of these things, and they all take time. And like we're all tired of it, but Tom Telesco can't worry about that. The failings of past regimes are not his failings. All he can worry about right now is how do I fix this roster today as I sit here? And I think, this year's draft was a real indication of his approach. And by the way, this year's draft is turning out to be a very strong one from the Raiders. So I think you got to look at it and say, hey, long-term plan is something that Telesco always had in mind.
And I think there's a difference, Fitz, too, right? And I'm sure you and I will have this philosophical discussion many a time between now and April. But there's a difference between building something that's great for a year or really fun for a year, and you kind of capture lightning in a bottle, as opposed to knowing year in and a year out for 10, 12, 15 years that this team is going to be in contention. This team is built the right way. The DNA of the team is the right way. Yes, we're going to lose players to free agency, injury, this, that, and the other. But the way that everything has gone, we are built to withstand that and kind of carry on to the next iteration of the team. So again, not to look too far down the road, but I think that fundamentally there's a big difference between the quick fix, like you say, where it's a lot of fun for 6 months, and then making sure that what you're building is sustained and doing it the right way. However, I wanted to shift to the Raiders defense, which we talked about earlier, where after a really rough first quarter, and we talked about giving you every opportunity to kind of hang your head, say, hey, we'll get back to Vegas, we'll try it again on primetime against the Falcons. These guys really showed up, bucked up, did it the right way. Now, one gentleman that I really want, well, actually two that I want to bring to our attention. Number one, friend of the program, Caleb Von Chason, who seemingly, we talk about midseason additions, guys that have kind of fit exactly what the Raiders are trying to build. Caleb Von finishes his afternoon with a half a sack, a quarterback hit, a tackle for loss, an interception, a pass defense, and the interception Fits one of the more athletic interceptions that we have seen from a Raider in 2024. But I think for me, again, we zoom out a little bit. the Raiders defense, I should say, finally got those turnovers and got them in bunches. And give them credit because we talked about it earlier. They held on as hard as they could. Yes, the first quarter was ugly. We are not here to dismiss that. But after that, they played really good football for a majority of this football game, and they kept the Raiders in it.
Yeah, and Caleb is somebody that, just a reminder that it takes some guys a minute to click in this
Yeah.
league, because there were some pretty good expectations for him when he got drafted. He was going to come right in, and that didn't happen for him. And now we've seen a very Malcolm Kuntz-like rise from him over the course of the last few weeks. And I think we talked about that a few weeks ago. Like, we're seeing people develop throughout the course of the year. We're like, wow, maybe there is something. Remember, we were all stoked this year about Malcolm Kuntz because of what he did in the last month of the season. Seeing some of that from Caleb, which I think is truly special. And not for nothing. I mean, again, lost in the process of these losses, but Trayvon Merrick continues
that was
be
the other
right
guy I
of,
wanted to bring up. Yep.
I mean, that's somebody that I thought was going to be a first round pick when I was covering it the year the Raiders drafted him in the second. I thought they were going to pick him in the first. Turns out it was the opposite. And I just watch him every week and think, what else do you want from him? Like, he's in position, making plays. The signing of Epps really helped him develop, obviously. It just feels like he's become a consistent standard. Yeah, I can count on this guy. I can count on him on the back end of the defense. I can count on him to make big plays. I can count on him to be a disruptor when he has to get after it. Like, he's become a true steady rocking force in the back end of this defense. And I don't want to take that for granted on a bad season.
So seldom, Fitz, do we get to look smart on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. But I tweeted out the play before Trayvon had the fumble recovery. I said, man, Trayvon Merrick's 2024 has been good. Really solid. 30 seconds later, what does our man do? Fumble recovery. But to your point, like, in a secondary that has all of a sudden been ravaged by injuries and has gotten really young, like, Trayvon has been such a steady force on the back end there. And I think Trayvon is kind of that perfect example of, we talk about this sustained approach to team building. He's kind of the poster boy for that, because he has gotten better and better and better year after year after year. More has been put on his plate each year, and he has just kind of excelled in each of those roles. So we talk about guys who maybe don't come in day one and are these, all-world, all-pro, everything. But you look at a guy like Trayvon, and Trayvon has, like I said, just gotten better and better and better. And now it's really hard to imagine a Raiders secondary in 2024 without Trayvon Merrick, because in so many ways, Fitz, he has really been the glue that has kept that thing together.
Also, think about, I mean, look, Darnay Holmes was making plays today, right?
Yeah,
and
shout out to Darnay.
What I kept thinking about in that moment was, let's remember the context last year of the conversation we were having about this defense as it started to get better over the course of the season. And that was, Patrick Graham's defense requires a lot of mentality from a lot of guys. You got to think a lot. There's a lot you got to do. It takes a minute to learn that defense. And with that knowledge that we've gained, and we've seen the way the defense grows when they have more time under task in this system, are we not should we not at least be expecting what we're seeing right now, which is young guys that are coming in, and it takes a second. Like, if we're going to say last year, wow, it really takes a minute for players that have been in this league, been around this defense, to figure it out. When you are now testing the depth of that defense and you're bringing different guys in every single week, and suddenly you're asking more from young guys in the secondary, and you're asking all sorts of communication, we're now asking everybody to pick up this complicated defense overnight. I think what we're seeing here in some of this is, like, time under task matters for this. So it's been a testament to the defense that they've been able to stick together. No, I thought they were going to be a top 5 defense this year. Has that happened? No. They've been decimated with injuries from the outset of this defense. We never really saw what we thought we were going to see. But do we see flashes every single week of a defense playing hard and together? Hell yeah. And I think that's worth noting here, that this defense has not been part of the fail of this season week in and week out.
Yeah, and I think, especially as we look over the final month of this season now, Fitz, like, what do we want to see, right? And we've talked about this before. Like, we're at the point in the program, and unfortunately, no playoffs for the Raiders. You want to play spoiler in some sense, but, like, you really want to see development. That's what we're focused on over these next 4 or 5 weeks, is development. And you look at a guy like DeCamerion Richardson, who's getting a lot of burn, right? Who's getting a lot of playing time for a variety of reasons. You look at these young guys like JPJ, DJ Glaze, Brock Bowers doing what he's doing. Desmond Ridder, a young guy. Like, all these guys that are going to have opportunities to put film on tape, to show what they can do. I think for me, over this final month, that's what I want to see. I just want to look at this young nucleus, this young core, and say, hey, when this season wraps up on whatever it is, just January 4th, January 5th, I hope that they're playing better football and we feel better about them as individual football players than we do now on December 8th.
Imagine how much different our tone will be at the end of the season if we've seen just a bang out month from Caleb Hunt,
Oh, yeah.
if we've seen guys like Adam Butler, who I know obviously banged up in this one, but guys like Butler continue to have their moments of shine, right? Like if we see guys at every level continue, if Spillane continues to play so well, there are moments where we can step back at the end and say, hey, before we just decide that everything is broken, let's look at some of these individual performances and ask the question, do we have individual pieces on this team that are still worth building around? And the answer, I think, on the defensive side of the ball, particularly, is yeah, we do. Like you're right. Jack Jones getting called for a pass interference was a tough look today, but Jack Jones was also playing tough to the ball. Right. And if we go all the way back to the beginning of the year, when you asked what are we looking for in training camp, one of my things was, hey, Jack Jones has got to show that he is consistently a number one shutdown corner. We've got to see these things grow because it's a heck of a lot easier to think, hey, let's keep some guys and develop some guys than it is to think, great, we're going to go out in free agency in the draft and find 14 new starters for next year's team on the offensive and defensive side. Like, that's not realistic. So what are we looking for? Why am I watching every Sunday? I'm watching because, frankly, a Sunday of silver and black is always going to be better than a Sunday without it. So in June, when I'm sitting here lamenting that I don't get football, I will take watching the Raiders in any situation over watching a replay of a Western that my dad watched when I was a kid. Like, I don't want that, right? But then the other part of it right now, why am I watching? I want to see who I can look at and find the silver lining. I want to find the silver lining for as many players as possible. Be like, hey, young guy that's learning, going to be part of the future of this team. Because the more silver linings you find right now, like look at Carolina. You want to tell me that the Carolina Panthers, based on the play of Bryce Young over the last few weeks, don't feel drastically better about what their next year is going to look like than they did a month ago? We don't need that from the quarterback. I think the quarterback isn't on this roster. We need that from everybody else. Continued development that shows you who's going to be around and who you can bank on.
Yeah, and I think one thing too, Fitz, and we talk about it, we've talked about it a handful of times. The one thing kind of, I don't want to say the one thing, but one of the things kind of team wide that I want to see, we talked about how good this defense has been. And yes, you're 100% right, where you look at some of these individual pieces and guys like Trayvon and Jack, and we got the full Jack Jones experience, right? With the PI and then the interception, right? Like Jack giveth and Jack taketh away, right? But I think one thing that I really want to see over this final month is just I don't want to say a recommitment, but maybe just a little bit better in stopping the run, because you look at what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did today. They went 26 for 152. And I don't know if it's possible to have a quiet 152 on the ground, but that's what it felt like it was just repeated over and over and over, darn near 6 yards a carry for the Bucs. So we talk about just areas of a game that can be shored up and areas of a game that can be better going down the stretch this final month. That is another big one that I would love to see. And you're right, where yes, it has not been fun the past 9 weeks, right? There has not been a Raiders victory to talk about. Unfortunately, Fitz, we still have not given you a win to discuss on our humble little program in 2024. I'm going to will one into existence. But you're 100% right, where a silver and black Sunday or Monday in the case next week is better than not having a chance to talk about ball. But, you know, I think it is easy in these moments right now as we're approaching mid-December and it feels like there's so many unknowns surrounding the silver and black, to kind of find those moments of joy, to kind of find those pockets of, hey, this is something that we can build on in 2024, because you and I have had this discussion many times, both on this show and the other shows and just kind of in our off-the-field shenanigans sessions. The idea that you are going to completely retool a roster, an NFL roster, in 2025, the fact that you're like, oh, we're going to have 25, 30 new starters, it's not going to happen. So at some point, if you're a fan of this team, if you are committed to seeing the Raiders play winning football, you are going to have to get big performances, big jumps from guys that are here right now. So seeing which guys those are, like that to me is something exciting to watch down the stretch.
Yeah, 100% it is. And, you know, through all of this, I know we all are going to be sitting here obsessing over the draft positioning and where that's going to be. I get it. I'm doing the same thing. I'm not going to lie. I'm sitting there reading every mock draft. I've already started my draft prep anyway. Like, this is part of life for me. I understand why we're all going to be obsessed over it. But I also think that if there's any one lesson we have to learn about this year's team, is that one position will not save. All right. If you truly want to compete with, you know, I think what now is going to become one of the best all time. I mean, all time coach quarterback conversation, the combos. Like when they make a Mount Rushmore of the best quarterbacks and head coaches together at the same time in 20 years, I don't think they'll be able to make that Mount Rushmore without Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. So you got Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, the best defensive coordinator. You got Bo Nix, who turns out to be much better than I expected he was going to be, with a coach in Sean Payton that obviously knows how to get the most out of him. And you got Harbaugh taking on Herbert. This is not something to be or with Herbert. This is not something to be down about. This is something to be realistic about. You are not going to, I think, in this draft, suddenly solve all the woes that you have and suddenly make yourself competitive with all those teams by simply finding one guy. You're going to have to build around that one guy. It's going to take the right combination of people in the room with the right combination of players. And, frankly, you're right, Eddie. We need a bunch of these guys to really stand up. And every single week I watch this and I think, man, what a home for every single person that sat there and yelled at all of us about Brock Bowers being the 13th pick in last year's draft. Every week when you watch, you think, holy cow. Like, I believe that the best tight end in the entire division, single-handedly, clearly right now, is in Vegas. I believe you could make an argument that Vegas already has a top 3 tight end in the entire NFL, and that's out of 113th pick. So, let's just all calm down about who's going to be the savior to fix this and start figuring out how do you get as many Brock Bowers on this team as possible? Because that's the real way that you become a Super Bowl caliber football team.
Yeah, give me 53 Brock Bowers, and I think we'll be just okay. All right, Jason Fitz, our next up for the Silver and Black, a Monday Night Football game against the Atlanta Falcons. The Desmond Ritter, I don't want to say the Desmond Ritter revenge game, right? But the storylines will be there all week. All right, obviously one of the places that Desmond is very familiar with. And again, as we record this about an hour after the game, we don't know who's going to be the starting quarterback, right? You and I are not doctors, but another opportunity on primetime for the Silver and Black, so that'll be a lot of fun. Allegiant Stadium will be rocking. It'll be a blast to see that place loud and excited and full of holiday spirit. I cannot wait. And the benefit to the common man like you and I, we get a real weekend next weekend, which is kind of fun too. And especially at this time of the year, I will take any of the real weekends that I can get. But Fitz, you rarely have a real weekend because you're one of the busiest men in sports media. Where can our friends in the Raider Nation find you?
Well, on social media at Jason Fitz, everywhere FITZ, and then check out Yahoo Sports. I've got inside coverage, our NFL podcast. It's every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday night after the games. We react to every single game, and then the College Football Power Hour every Tuesday and every Saturday, getting you all your college football needs. So we're out there, but check out the Yahoo Sports app. Check out all my work there, and who knows? Maybe I'll end up in Allegiant in a Grinch costume.
Ooh, how about that? How about that? And I will end with a Go Ducks as we talk about the college football playoff and everything coming our way over the next couple months. Well, to bring it all home, the Las Vegas Raiders unfortunately fall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 28-13. Another rough one for the Silver and Black. But the beauty of this, we will do it again. We talk about what's up next for the Raiders, a Monday Night Football matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, and that will be a lot of fun. So, for Eddie Paskal, my man Jason Fitz, and everyone else at Silver and Black Productions, enjoy the week, Raider Nation, and we will see you guys next Monday night for our next episode of the Fifth Quarter presented by Twitch.